Hello, hello. All right, we're welcoming Stephanie, who's going to be our ASL interpreter. So just wanted to do an accessibility check. Awesome. Super excited to get today's conscious conversation going. I'm going to go ahead and invite. Yep, 1 second. All right, and then hello.
Hey, Greg. How's it going?
It's going well. So great. I got an extra amount of joy just now seeing you pop up. Thank you so much for taking some time to do this conscious conversation with me and us.
Everything and anything for you, Greg. So good to be here. So nice to meet you.
Awesome. Well, greetings everyone who's tuning in or who are going to be checking this out later. You have reached the next edition of Conscious Conversation with a dear friend, a comrade, a movement mate, and I'm excited to introduce them and kind of dig into the conversation. Is it okay if I embarrass you a little bit, Kevin, and read your bio for folks?
Sure.
Awesome. So at least a part of it, because we couldn't do the whole bio because we wouldn't have time for the conversation. But I at least want to give people a little bit of a sense of why I'm excited to talk with you. So, Dr. Kevin Leo Yabut Nadal is a professor of psychology at both John Jay College of Criminal Justice and the Graduate Center at the City University of New York. He received his doctorate in counseling psychology from Columbia University in New York City, and is one of the leading researchers in the understanding the impacts of microaggressions or subtle forms of discrimination on the mental and physical health of people of color, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer, LGBTQ people, and other marginalized groups. He is author of 10 books, including Filipino American Psychology, That's So Gay, Microaggressions and the Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Community, and Queering Law and Order. I'm pacing myself for the interpreter. He was the first openly gay president of the Asian American Psychological Association and the first person of color to serve as the executive director of the Center for LGBTQ Studies. He's also a national trustee of the Filipino American National Historical Society, or FONS, and co-founder of the LGBTQ Scholars of Color Network. Whew. Thank you again, Kevin. I'm going to start with a question that we ask all of our guests who come on. And the first question, in the spirit of our ancestor, Ella Baker, who are your people?
Who are my people? My people are you. My people are folks who are movement makers, movement mates, as you say. My people are, my Filipino, Filipinx American folks, as well as Filipinx folks across the diaspora. My people are queer and trans folks, particularly trans and queer people of color. My people are my family, biological and chosen. My people are really folks who are just trying to make the world a better place, and in doing so, learning and growing, and just trying to, all do our part to fight against injustice and, make it better for the next generation. That sounds cheesy, but I mean it.
I mean, it is a little cheesy, but also real, and I think even more so in this moment, I feel like particularly critical, because I think if folks were oriented to actually building and supporting and thinking about the next generation, I think people would be making different kinds of decisions than they are making now, to be honest. So,
Yep.
So thank you for that. The next question that I'm curious to hear your response to is, when was the last time you felt brave?
Oh my gosh. The last time I felt brave, um, I can't even remember. It's actually fun. I can tell you the last time I didn't feel brave, and this is
Okay.
kind of real, especially because I'm wearing this T-shirt that says "gay, educated, and petty." But sometimes I was just having a conversation with a dear friend of mine whose child just has come out at a relatively young age as a teenager, and my friend was telling me about how her child has been trying to dress in more gender queer, non-conforming, non-binary ways, and how they recently, been experiencing things like getting stared at or people talking under their breath, nothing overtly violent. And one of the things I told her was, sometimes for me as a 40-something-year-old, I still feel that. Like I don't always necessarily wear the things that I want to wear, or even feel comfortable to wear things that maybe I could in different spaces. And so that's where sometimes I don't feel brave, even just walking with this gay, educated, and petty t-shirt, which I wore for you in honor of National Coming Out Day week, LGBTQ History Month. Like sometimes I still have to be conscious and vigilant about, where am I going to be? Who's going to see me? Are they going to say anything? And while I feel, definitely less scared or worried than maybe I did when I was younger, I think this is a real reality for queer and trans folks, especially trans and queer people of color who are so susceptible to violence. That we have to live our truth and be brave, but also just be vigilant about the situation and our environment at all times. And it's not like, and I think one of the things I was trying to convey to my friend who was worried about her child is that, this is something that as a mother, as a parent, that, I can only imagine what that's like to worry about. And at the same time, it's something that all of us, I would say, have learned to do. And it's not great to have to learn to do it, and that we've been so vigilant and resilient in that way. But it's also something that, makes us, stronger, makes us more aware of our surroundings, where we are at all times. And also, like, sadly, something that really like bonds us together. Like this is the collective struggle and maybe this is why some of us are more passionate about these issues, because we do want to ensure that we can make that a little bit easier for future generations, so that they'll probably still have to be vigilant as this young person is, but hopefully not as vigilant as maybe in the past.
Yeah, no, I that definitely resonates. I mean, even for myself, who I, consider being pretty out, or at least like comfortable in who I am. Like there are definitely moments, or there have been moments where I've had questioned or wanted to, questioned my safety, or if that was something I would need to be more mindful of in given in particular situations. And I guess maybe as a follow-up to kind of your response, I'm curious, like what are the conditions, or what will it take for more of us to feel more safe, to be able to be more brave, and what are some of those conditions, or what is your thinking on like what we can do in this moment to continue to challenge and disrupt the conditions to be able to get to that place?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that we might not see overnight, but in retrospect, my experience as, let's say, a 14-year-old person is different than, I hope, what this 14-year-old person is dealing with right now. The way that this person has spoken about it, it seems like, stares and whispers and things like that, which, for someone like me, that would have been 30 years ago. Would have experienced stares and whispers, but there also would have been violence. I knew lots of queer people who were beat up regularly, and that, made me, extra vigilant, extra closeted, extra, cautious of making sure that, no one, discovered this secret, whatever, however, people wanted to refer it to, because, you know, it wasn't quite a secret. It was just something that like I just didn't share with people, right?
Right.
And so I think, like, you know, when I think about the differences in time, yes, while we know there definitely is still lots and lots of violence that occur, especially towards trans people and Black trans women specifically, you know, I want to say that it feels a little safer in certain places, and you know, like I walk around, you know, my neighborhood, and I, you know, have all of my neighbors who are presumably, you know, straight men, straight cis men, and they all say hi to me, and I'm as you know, as I was gonna say flamboyant, but I don't know. Am I flamboyant? Maybe. But like, as real and truthful as I am, walking down the street, walking my dog, walking with my family, and you know, and I don't know that they or, you know, not even they specifically, but that hypothetical group of straight cis men of color in Harlem would have been as kind to somebody 30 years ago, you know, who was queer or had was walking around in their lives. And so I mean, to go back to your question, I think that there are little things that people can do on individual levels. I think that every time you shoot down a homophobic or transphobic comment, in addition to, you know, racist, xenophobic, sexist comments and ableist comments and all those things, that helps to create an environment where people know that it's not okay to talk like that, where people know that, you know, it's unacceptable, and where if there is somebody who belongs to those marginalized groups, so let's say a queer trans person or a young woman or a person of color, they hear that there's someone out there who actually is defending them or is actually standing up against oppression. And so then that makes that person feel a little safer, because it used to be that even if you avoided homophobia or avoided transphobia, that you still didn't know if anyone was actually affirming or for you or pro you. You know, it just was that there was the absence of, you know, some of that stuff. And so I think those are some of the things that we can do on individual levels. But I think on systemic levels, there are lots of things we could do. I think every workplace environment, every school environment need to have, you know, really overt queer and trans affirming policies, guidelines, trainings, curricula, all sorts of things that are integrated through an intersectional lens into all aspects of the workplace. Because when it's unaddressed and just people aren't talking about them, then it's something that, you know, is basically being swept under the rug, and people might presume that everything's fine, but it's not an overt action that they're taking to try to make it, you know, a safer, more inclusive environment for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate you naming kind of the different spheres, right? Because there are things that we can do as individuals. There are things that we can do as we are in relationship with people that we know and that we love. And then there's also like the institutional and systemic pieces that are also important. And so I believe that at least part of our work at Can't Stop Won't Stop Consulting is actually like the question that I always ask when we talk with folks we work with is like, how do we actually challenge or create the conditions in which folks can be their full selves, bring be their full, authentic, whole selves, and can be as brave as possible, knowing that, of course, that may look different in different contexts, but the more that we can get closer to that, the more that we can be in a place for more people to feel that safety and that ability to be brave. And so appreciate that. I'm curious that the next thread I'm curious to go in is around just the work that you've been doing. Clearly, just even from the excerpt of the bio I was able to share, you've done a lot of research, you've done a lot of writing, you do a lot of teaching, and I'm like, what was the path or what inspired you to become a professor, to become an author, and kind of take that route in terms of how you are serving and building with communities?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Greg. I mean, I think one of the things that I've been talking about a lot lately is this career trajectory that I've been on. And, one way that I've been thinking about it is, yeah, like, these are sort of the things that people do. You go to school, or especially for some of us who come from families where there was no other option than to go to school. And then, you get a job and, hopefully it's one that you like. But for me, I feel like my drive, my passion, I've been really fortunate in a lot of ways to not have to take a trajectory that may have been traditional or safe, or even, one that would have made my parents happy. And I want to acknowledge that I know that a lot of people have to take those, or feel forced or compelled to take those trajectories because of that family pressure and cultural pressures and things like that. But, for me, it was like when my parents said from a very young age, you have to go to college. And in fact, that was something that they just reminded us of all the time. We did not come to this country so that you could just do nothing, and that's literally something that they would have said regularly. And so when I went to college, like well, when I went to in high school, my senior year, I actually had a psychology class that I really, really liked. And, it wasn't like particularly like groundbreaking or stimulating in the sense that like there wasn't anything really special about it. But it was the fact that we had a teacher who was in a space where we just talked about human behavior for however long class periods are, 45 minutes. And that was just fascinating to me. And it's really odd, if you think about it, that we don't have psychology like integrated into all parts of the curricula from a very young age, right? That maybe a classic psychology could help, an adolescent learn about relationships and communication styles, or even like a third grader learn about communication and relationships and things like that. So it really was just that, this opening the door to like just learning about people and understanding people that I felt, really interested in a way that I wasn't interested in history, in math and science, and that sort of thing. I also think, given that the curricula that I was exposed to at that time was so white-centered, Euro-centered, heteronormative, cis-normative, and so those are other reasons why I wasn't interested in anything else. And so at least there was an opportunity to talk about something that was, new and at least somewhat stimulating to me. And then when I went to college, I majored in psychology because I liked this one high school class. But, my first like couple of years, I kind of hated psychology because here I went from learning about like, people and understanding human behavior to going into college where we talked about all the parts of psychology that just I was not interested in, and especially for that to be the introduction. So things like neuropsychology, brain and behavior, all the science aspects of it. I avoided psychology because I didn't want to go into science. And then and then it was so white centered, right? It was very colorblind. It was very much like we treating everyone the same. And I was like, look, this isn't my experience. Everything that you're talking about. I want to talk about the racial, ethnic, cultural parts of psychology. I'm going to talk about, the cultural nuances of gender and how that influences, our psyches. And as an undergrad, I was introduced to my mentor, who said, "Why don't you go to grad school and you could change all this?" And I didn't know what grad school was. I've told this story so many times, but it's that changed the trajectory of my life. Like, I had a Latina professor, Dr. Jeanette Castellanos at UC Irvine, who has mentored hundreds of young people, especially young people of color. And, basically said, we have to change the field of psychology. And so I went to grad school, and everything that I studied was to give voice or to highlight everything that had not been covered before. So I would write about experiences of Filipino Americans. I write about experiences of queer and trans people, and especially queer and trans people of color. And then that's it. I just started writing, like I don't know why or how. I don't know. I joke a lot of times that it was just like the ancestors coming through my body and writing, because that's just all I started to do, you know? And then, you know, when I graduated, finished my dissertation, I started writing books. And then that's just sort of like what happened. But with all that being said, I've been a professor now for like 15 or 16 years. And I, you know, am now at this place where it's like, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? You know, I know that that might sound like privilege in some ways. Like lots of people would die to be a professor or to have a tenured job and to not have to worry about these things again. But you know, I'm also just like I'm in my early 40s, and like, where do I want to take this? And so what I've been doing for the last couple of years, especially, is, you know, I continue to be a professor and a teacher and a mentor and researcher and scholar and all this kind of stuff. But now what I'm chasing after are things that make me happy. And what makes me happy nowadays are things that serve my community, things that involve, you know, thinking about my family and just how to, you know, show up better for my family, especially my kids. And, you know, right now I'm working with Larry the Musical as a producer. And, you know, people are like, how did a professor get into, you know, theater? And there is no answer. Again, like, I think it's just, these are all the things that have sort of just kind of just happened, you know, and being, you know, in the right place at the right time, always being around, you know, people with good energy and good vibes. And then just kind of following, like, this is what I think the ancestors want me to do, you know? And so those are some of the rambling thoughts that I have. But back to your original question, it was always to give voice to people and experiences that, you know, were invisible. And for many of my identities as a Filipino person, as a queer person, and specifically as a queer person of color, a queer Asian American, Filipino American, that had been so invisible. And so, you know, if something's out there that hasn't been told, then you have to be the one to do it.
Absolutely. There are a couple of different threads. I'm gonna try to hold them. But the first one I'm gonna ask about is, you know, you kind of talked about the ancestors just coming in you and kind of helping you kind of put pen to paper stories and experiences about people and communities that you are part of or that you weren't seeing enough about there. I'm curious, can you talk just a little bit about that process for you? Like, now that you've written 10 books, and I imagine you've also been probably part of multiple other publications, like, what have you learned about your writing style? What have you learned about your voice? And like, how has it shifted, if at all, throughout those different books and processes? And can you shed some light, especially for folks who maybe haven't had a chance to publish a book or who are wondering or curious about like what that would mean or could look like? Can you shed some light on the process?
Yeah, you know, I mean, I think one thing that's really important is that in order to be a good writer, you have to write about something that you actually care about, and that you're really passionate about. It's hard to write about things that you have little interest in, or that you're not really invested in. And so always find something to write about. If you have to write, always find something to write about that you love. Another thing to think about is to write about what you know, write about things that you might know to be truth, especially things that you know to be truth that might not necessarily be part of the narrative. And so for me, it was writing about what I knew to be true about Filipino Americans, queer people of color, and doing the research to support that. So it wasn't just, these are my opinions, but this is what I know to be true of the communities that I'm part of. And I think, one thing that I think would be appropriate to address in here is as I think about, my writing and my trajectory over the years, it has been that I've had to really overcome, and still am, but had to overcome a lot of imposter phenomenon. And I think that that is something that plagues so many people in all of our communities, especially the more marginalized identities you might have, where many of us don't feel that we're good enough, we're not smart enough, we're not experts. And as a result of that, we get writer's block, or we get, we're unable to complete certain things, or we, just drop out, or just, give up on certain tasks, or even on dreams. I know a lot of people who just give up on their dreams because of imposter phenomenon. And I think for me, one of the things that I've that has helped me is to really, again, like, know that if you're writing about something that you're passionate about, and that you know that it's important to tell this story, or tell this experience, that we, it's not just about you, it's about everyone. It's about our collective history, as again, like, I think for like many Filipinx folks, like, I think we get it. And I think because it's like Kapwa and stuff like that. And I worry about other people not getting it. But I also don't care if other people don't get it. But when I think about the millions of Filipino and Filipino Americans who, whose voices are just gone. They're not part of history. They've been erased. They have nameless graves. Like, that gives me like the inspiration to keep on going, and that's a reason why, like, for whatever imposter phenomenon that I have, and for everyone who has it, it's real. It's real. It's a result of systemic oppression, and all the internalized negative messages we've heard our entire lives. But we have to fight through that in order to, to benefit the greater community, the greater collective, and to tell those stories. Just as an anecdote, like, so you mentioned that I have 10 books. I will have 12 books by the end of next year. One of them is the Sage Encyclopedia of Filipinx, Filipino American Studies. You're contributors to that. Thank you very much for participating. But, when I talk about it with certain folks, like, they, especially elders, they're like, wow, we get our own encyclopedia? And I said, yes, we do, And, I visited Stockton, California, which we know had the largest population of Filipino Americans prior to 1965, and that there were at least 100,000 Filipinos in the country prior to World War II. One of my friends there, Dylan Delvo, the founder of, executive director of Little Manila Rising, he said, can you just imagine the 100,000 manongs, elders, who just are finally, like, our stories get told. And that just, makes me feel motivated to keep on going.
Absolutely. I, one, appreciate you naming that publication, because I definitely appreciated being invited to be a part of it, and actually working with Tito John and Tito Bing to kind of write, to share at least the perspective and some of the history of Filipinos in Washington, D.C. I also wanted to just lift up the point around, you mentioned about imposter syndrome and phenomena. I feel like that is something that I have and continue to experience in different ways. And it's something that many people kind of, even if they don't name it as such, that is what they are feeling or experiencing. And so, let this be a reminder for folks like out there, like tuning into this, that you are worthy. You have a story to share. There's somebody who's looking forward and would be excited about the offerings that you will be able to put into the world and the universe. So wanting to name that, because I feel like this comes up more so often than not in conversations and even some work that we do as a firm. The other thread that I want to hold, because you mentioned this too, just you kind of now going to Larry the Musical and playing a producing role in it. And I had a chance to watch the kind of preview, which was beautiful, and the panel that you and Allison led was powerful, and I got chills just actually thinking about being able to watch it in person, and looking forward to supporting and making that dream a reality. And even just this idea that like, if you're a professor, you can't be a producer, or if you are an organizer and facilitator, you can't be a dancer, or whatever the notions are. So I'd love to maybe talk a little bit about like, how was that experience? Like, what was like, how did, like, I guess, especially after inviting or sharing the preview with folks, like what has been the feedback? And so can you share a little bit more with the audience around how that experience has been for you?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. So first of all, we're talking about Larry, a new musical, The Life of Larry It Leong, a new musical in which we just premiered our first workshop virtually on October 2nd, just over a week ago. And we hope it will be a successful musical that will be able to be toured nationally, perhaps even being on Broadway, as a way of just being able to tell this untold story. When people think about the history of the United States, in general, they tend to already ignore the contributions of people of color, and especially Asian Americans, who are oftentimes not included in history books altogether. And for Filipino Americans specifically, they're erased altogether, even in the telling of the United Farm Workers, in which farm workers were able to advocate for their rights and for increased wages and better working conditions, which changed the roles of unions and labor laws in this country, that Filipinos are forgotten. Filipinos were the first to strike. Larry It Leong, Pete Velasco, Philip Vera Cruz, and thousands of Filipino Americans first struck, and they recognized that in order for the strike to be successful, that they needed to work in solidarity with the Chicano Mexican farm workers. And so Larry It Leong approached Cesar Chavez, who was not ready or willing to strike at the time, and was able to convince them that this is what needed to happen. And so together, the Filipinos and the Chicanos worked together to eventually form the United Farm Workers, which again was perhaps the most successful labor movement in modern US history. And so telling this story is our opportunity to ensure that history isn't lost, and so that future generations and even this present generation, that they know this history, even if history books aren't teaching it in schools, even if our families don't know this history themselves, that we're ensuring this. I want to shout out Gail Romosanta and Brian Pangilinan and Melvin Balyola, who started this project and essentially invited me after just by the ancestors' interventions, allowed me to just hear it and to say, hey, I think this is something really special, and for me to be able to bring in my friends from Broadway and Broadway Barcada to join the production, and it just has spiraled into this beautiful, wonderful national collaboration, very similar to the United Farm Workers. And so the musical itself is going through several workshops. Because of COVID, these workshops the first one has been virtual. Usually a workshop is in a room of like 50 people. And these workshops, they build on it until it finally is ready for its full production and for Broadway shows for Broadway. But we were fortunate on that October 2nd workshop to premiere it to, I think, 4,000 people tuned in within that 24 hours to watch the workshop. It's an all Filipino production. Every cast member is Filipino. The creative team is entirely Filipino. And, it's our opportunity to share our story for us, by us, and about us. And, it's been, one of the most incredible experiences of my life. Like I've never really been in many spaces where I can say that this is completely Filipino run. You know, I'm used to being the only one in most spaces that I'm in. And in fact, like the more successful I get, I'm more likely to be the only one. And the only one doesn't just mean Filipino. It usually means the only queer person, the only person of color, and, you know, all the other things. And so, you know, it's just been a really wonderful experience. And I hope that folks might be interested or willing to help us make this a reality by visiting Larry the Musical. We currently have an Indiegogo campaign to really make this like a community-driven effort. You know, most Broadway shows have like one or two producers with lots of money that they throw at this. And even if we did have lots of money and we're welcoming lots of money, we also want to know that the community believed in it. And so any little bit helps to help us bring Filipino people on stage. And then just as a last point, like, you know, a lot of the actors that are participating in this, many of them have been like on Broadway, usually like in ensemble roles, most likely playing non-Filipino characters, or even, you know, sometimes like non-Asian characters, right? Miss Saigon or in The King and I, sometimes they play Puerto Rican in West Side Story, or they play, you know, like all sorts of different ethnic groups. And so, you know, it really is also an opportunity for Filipinos to see themselves on stage, you know, playing their own roles. And hopefully, you know, this will be just one of many musicals that can tell our stories about us and by us.
Yes, I'm so inspired because I feel like the story of Manong Larry and on the Manong and the Filipino farm workers is one that I feel like I've always continued to try to share, especially when I did work in the labor movement and with the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance. And even as you were talking about this experience with Larry the Musical, of it being an all-Filipino cast, an all-Filipino production team. And I even remember hearing some of the people, the folks, a part of the cast, like during like being interviewed, just sharing just like, this is such a unique experience. This is such a historical moment like in celebration of our community. And, you know, I know it's particularly timely. We are in Filipinx, Filipino history, American History Month. And so you did that premiere right at this to kick off the celebration of the month. I know you, and so I'm wanting to, you know, I know you're also part of funds and also a lot of other efforts in a lot of different ways, lifting up our people and our communities every day and every month, but especially in October. Can you, for those who are newer or not as familiar with Filipino American History Month, can you tell us a little bit about the origins, why it's important for you, and why it's something that you continue to play a large role in helping people know about it as a month, but also the different stories and the community that we come from?
Sure. Yeah. So October is Philippine American History Month, not Heritage Month, but History Month. We're emphasizing the contributions of people of Filipino descent who have been here in the land now known as the U.S. And how they have contributed to making you know, our society as what it is today. And I think one of the things that's why it's so important for me is because one of the reasons why I do this work is because I continue to not see myself in history books, in curriculum, and music, and movies, and television. And I want that to change. I want like current and future generations of young people to be able to see themselves. And so the Filipino American National Historical Society, which was founded in 1982 by Dr. Dorothy Ligo Cordova, founded Filipino American History Month under the direction of her husband, Dr. Fred Cordova. And, you know, it was really just to ensure that Filipinos were seen. many people might know this, many people might not know this, but when we think about Asian American umbrellas and diasporas, oftentimes Filipinos are forgotten. In fact, Uncle Fred Cordova in 1983 wrote a book called Filipinos, Forgotten Asian Americans. And even though that book was written almost 40 years ago, it's still sort of true today. Filipinos are oftentimes left out of any Asian American representation. Panels of Asian Americans will have mostly East Asians. Articles about Asian American history won't have contributions of Filipinos and South Asians or Southeast Asians. And so it really is up to us to tell our stories. If we don't tell them, then we risk that they don't get told at all, or even that they get told incorrectly. And that's something that we even have seen through US imperialism, that when we think about the colonization of the Philippines by the United States, in our history books, it's written as a good thing. In fact, it used to be called the Philippine Insurrection when they fought back against the Americans, when in reality, no, that was a war. That was people fighting for their freedom. That was Filipinos who wanted to fight against this American imperialism. And so, FONS and all of our partner organizations, have been fighting for Filipino American History Month to be recognized. In 2009, it was recognized by U.S. Congress. In 2015, President Obama recognized Filipino American History Month. More recently, President Biden has released a few statements on Filipino American History Month. And not that we necessarily needed their, approval, but it also just goes to show the power of community, how we were able to, start off really small with a group of FONS trustees in 1991 saying we should start this celebrating this month that commemorates our history and presence in the U.S. To eventually being recognized by sitting presidents and by U.S. Congress. I hope people continue to recognize the month. October was chosen because of the first people of Asian descent coming from the lands now known as the Philippines, the Luzones Indios, who arrived in what is now known as Morro Bay, California in October of 1587. It also is the birth month of Larry Itliong. His birthday is on October 25th. California has recognized Larry Itliong's birthday as a statewide holiday. I hope things like this continue. The more we tell our stories, the more we gain our collective history. And the more we gain our collective history, the more that others can understand how important Filipinx Americans have been to this country and to the entire world.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And let this be a reminder, an opportunity for us to continue to celebrate this month and continue to encourage folks to share their story. So I think I've seen you post this a couple of times that we're also living history, making history, and finding more ways to be able to lift up our own experiences and narratives is also an important part of that. Speaking of intersectionality, October is also LGBT History Month. This week on Monday was National Coming Out Day, and this is National Coming Out Week. And so thank you. I know you mentioned you wear the shirt, gay, educated, and petty in honor of that. So thank you. Salamat. And I guess I'm curious, and I think you maybe touched on this earlier on, but would love to hear some of your own reflection on, what would you say is different about, coming out, or as, our comrade Jose Antonio Vargas says, letting people in. How do you think that's changed over time or over the last 20 years? And especially in this moment, how do you think people are feeling encouraged or being willing to share, their full selves, but especially their identity, their LGBTQ identity?
Yeah. I think there are a lot of reasons why things may have gotten at least a little bit better for some people. People might still experience violence and obviously lots of other disparities that LGBTQ folks, especially young people, still face. Things like homelessness, more runaways, more involvement in criminal justice system, more involvement in foster care system, and so forth. To learn more, check out Queering Law and Order. However, I think one of the other things that we can acknowledge is that it might be easier for some kids, at least, to come out. This past year alone, I wrote about this recently in my Psychology Today blog, and that is that, this past year, a handful of friends who are parents had told me that their teenage kids had come out to them as trans or queer, and they wanted to share their experience with me, that was something that I would not have seen in my lifetime, right? I mean, one of the reasons why I don't think I came out until I was going to say like a late age. I didn't come out to my parents until I was in my early to mid 20s, which I think is late, and for some people think is early. So it really depends on the context. But I think one of the reasons why I didn't tell anyone for so long is because I didn't have any role models. I didn't know, what it would be like, and in fact, if anything, the data was that I would not be accepted because you had seen so many people who were disowned from their families, and all of the things. And so, so I do acknowledge that it's gotten better. And I think for at least for coming out. And I think one of the reasons why is because people have been more vocal. And that has been, teachers, educators being more vocal, maybe not all of them, but if there are just even a couple who have been vocal in a child's life, that can help tremendously in them, developing this healthy sense of identity. I think, media and people who've been really instrumental in providing more positive media portrayals of LGBTQ folks provides that young person with the opportunity to see, what the possibilities are, even if it is like a fictional show like Glee or Modern Family. It still is something for them to sort of see that this is what it's like. Earlier before them, it was Noah's Ark and the L word for women, and other visions, versus before that we had nothing. We really had nothing. LGBTQ folks used to be just the sidekick character, or maybe had a funny line or two, or were targeted by violence. And so those were the messages that we had learned. One thing that is very much part of my experience, and may or may not be part of younger generations' experience, is we had the AIDS epidemic that was really a cloud over all of our identity development for queer men, especially trans people, because we just thought we were all going to die. And so that struggle of wanting to be happy and do things that made you happy, but also fearing that, in doing so, that could lead to us acquiring this disease at the time in the 80s and 90s that no one knew anything about. That definitely could have contributed to difficult processes in accepting ourselves. But I think now, just people who are queer and trans, who are out, who are just living their best lives, as Janet Mock had said before, who have the audacity to live in their truths. That makes such a difference. I think about when I was a young kid, every once in a while I'd see a queer person, and especially a gay man of color, who I would just watch from far away, and I would know they were gay or queer, and while I wasn't ready, I had thought okay, that's a possibility, and oftentimes it would be like a stranger, someone I would see at church or a picnic or something, because everyone in my family, there were no gay people. It was just people with roommates. That was it. And so this is why, it's so important for those of us who are out to just to make sure that we can be visible. I know not everyone is able to, but for those of us who can, because there is likely some young person out there who is seeing that you are representation of what could be, and I hope that helps the next generation to keep on going.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was interesting because for the longest, in a lot of kind of talks or times I gave, was doing any public speaking, I was very clear to always name or mention or say that I was gay or queer.
Yeah,
And people would always ask, 'cause even in like non-LGBTQ specific
yeah,
spaces, I always kind of made a note. And a couple of folks would always ask, like, hey, like, you always happen to mention that, why, or share that with folks. Why
right,
do you do that? And I tell them it's because it literally after every event or thing, there was at least one person, in many cases, it was multiple people who were like, thank you. Like,
yeah,
I didn't know there were gay labor leaders. I didn't know that there were other gay Filipinx or gay Asian American folks that did this work that I could actually talk to, or that, could like, really shifted their even idea of what was possible. And so I hold that still to this day because I'm like, okay, even if now we're doing a lot more things virtually, I don't know who's happen to be tuning
yeah,
in or seeing this in a future time. And so how do I model and show that, like, yes, there are other gay, queer, LGBTQ folks out there, and we will be nurturing, we will be loving, whether you're out or not. Like, we want to affirm you and support you in the ways that that you need and want. So that you sharing that, I think, was a reminder and kind of like a affirmation for me to be like, that this is a small way, but I think an ongoing way that I could continue to try to make more spaces feel inclusive and nurturing for folks.
right.
Um, and one other just question around, because I know that the topic of mental health has also been coming up a lot, and and especially in some of your writings, and especially at the intersection of LGBTQ and Black, Indigenous, people of color folks, it is becoming even in the midst of a pandemic has also like added another layer. Can you share a little bit about even just how have you maintained your own mental health? How do, even as someone who is like, that talks about it and the impacts that these different systems of oppression have on our community's mental health, and are there any practices of healing and restoration that you would like to share with folks?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. First of all, thank you for mentioning how mental health and wellness have become integrated into community organizing. That's something that I've really appreciated in even just like the last 5 years, right? It's not even that new, old of a thing. It's still relatively new because I remember in my earlier days as an organizer that if I told people, oh, I was in graduate school for psychology, there would be some like wisecrack about like, oh, are you going to be my therapist? I'm like, oh, that's so weird. Why would I be your therapist? We're organizing. But like I think now, there are wellness checks and there are, intentional inclusions of wellness in on like agendas and things like that. I think that's part of organizing. There are people who are really vocal about ensuring that became such a regular part of the process of community organizing. And I hope that people continue to do that, especially in BIPOC and QT POC spaces. But I think for me, the most important thing about self-care and wellness is that it cannot be just all all talk. It can't just be something that we say and then not do. There are a lot of things that we do in social justice organizing that we know are just all talk, right? And you and I probably have talked and just missed about this on the side, but people that will do their indigenous land acknowledgements or do like their pronouns, but in reality be really racist or transphobic or all these other things. And so in addition to those things where we can't just have to be, say the things and not really act upon it, I think wellness is something that if people are going to talk about it, they really have to ensure that they're practicing it. So organizations, need to be mindful of like, are you overworking people? Are you, giving in to this capitalist society of more work and more productivity is the goal, as opposed to people's happiness being the goal, you know? And I understand that a lot of people are in systems in which, you know, they don't have real control over that, or feel hindered from being able to advocate for that. So I understand that. And so this is why it's so important for leaders of organizations, whether it be, you know, executive directors, managers, you know, lead organizers, to really take that initiative to ensure that people are taking care of themselves. You know, one thing that I've learned over time, both physiologically and mentally and psychologically, is that you just can't do everything. You know, like I, as a 40-year-old, 43-year-old with two small kids, cannot go to every single rally. Like, not just physically because of babysitting issues, but also physiologically. Like, I'm old, you know, and I know I'm not old, but, you know, like my body just will not react well to marching. You know, I did some marching this past year, especially, and I was like, oh my gosh, how are people doing this every single week, you know? And so, you know, just paying attention to your body and just saying, like, you know, I don't have to be the one to do this. You know, one of the things that I learned earlier on in my organizing days, and then my transition into being, you know, more of a scholar activist, is that we all have our roles. You know, no one should be shamed or meant to feel as if they're not doing something good enough, or, you know, that they have to do something in order to be, you know, considered part of the movement. Instead, we have to all realize that there are lots of reasons why people aren't doing everything. It could be you know, things like age, it could be things like mental health, it could be things like accessibility, right? And so we all have to, you know, just recognize that we're all doing our parts. You know, everything that I do in academia, or writing policies and things that influence government, or, you know, training the next generation of folks who I hope will become, you know, activists and organizers and scholars themselves, that's all part of the movement, you know? And so I think just, you know, making those decisions, setting those boundaries, not feeling bad about it, because that's another thing, especially if you come from, like, you know, historically marginalized backgrounds. Sometimes we feel guilt for not doing things, but just, you know, really assessing, like, is it that I can't do this because is it because I don't want to do this and, you know, I really can, or is it because, you know, it really is, I need to set this boundary for my own mental health. And so, you know, I think really just practicing that, like staying home, sleeping, like that's the best gift you can give yourself. And don't feel bad about it, you know? There's always going to be another protest. There's always going to be another action, or another, you know, campaign you have to be part of. But if your body's telling you that you're burning out, then you need to rest. And if your siblings in the movement understand that and respect that, then this is how we're able to sustain more of us in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate you kind of just naming the importance and the work of even integrating the wellness and understanding of mental health and the importance of mental health in organizing spaces. I think it's an ongoing thing that more people are even trying to figure out what that means for themselves and in their particular context. But personally, I'm excited about it and continue to encourage people to really think about not only self-care, but like community and collective care. How are we making sure that we are getting the care and community we need, but that our loved ones and folks that we are in community are getting that care as well. And so, yeah, so so I have one other question, but before I ask that final question of you, I wanted to give you an opportunity to ask me a question, if you had a question for me.
Oh my gosh, if I knew that, I would have asked something fun. What's the tea? What's the chismet? No, we could do that after we get off IG Live. But, you know, but what, you know, how about this? What is one thing that you, as an activist, organizer, strategist, what would you tell an academic, somebody working in the confines of academia? What do you need from us?
Okay, so what I would say is be more like Kevin. And what I mean by that is how do we, because I think even as someone who's even explored, like what would it be for me to go back to grad school or get another degree? I think the one thing that I've found, especially working with different scholars and folks in academia, is how do you continue to be in relationship with the people or the folks most impacted by what you are writing and doing research about. And so that doesn't necessarily mean, I think that could look a lot of ways. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be an organizer and actively doing organizing, but are there organizations that you're in relationship with? Are you creating space and opportunity for folks who identify or who are part of those communities to give various types of input? Are the ways that input is being offered accessible, right? Like, are like, what are the different ways you are doing that? And so that would just be one thing that I would say. And I think from my own experience, how do you also do that in a way that people feel welcome and wanting to engage? Because I think I've had some experience where they're like, well, you don't have another degree, or well, you're not a doctor. Then there being a different dynamic or feeling of an experience because of that realization. And so that would be something that I would say.
Well, yeah, that's really good advice. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to just first say thank you, because I feel like I'm grateful to be in relationship and in community with you, and it was a pleasure to kind of talk and kind of help introduce or have more folks learn and hear about the amazing work you're doing. As we get ready to close out, I know you kind of already mentioned Larry the Musical, which is larrythemusical.com. And there's an Indiegogo campaign. But are there other calls to actions or anything else that you want to lift up for folks in terms of how they can be supportive of you and the work that you are doing?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I think one of the things that I would just ask that people do is continue to spread the love and continue the fight of the movement. I think one of the things that's really important is to look back at history and understand what's come before you, to know that we're all interconnected in some way, and that we have a lot that we can learn from people of the past. You also have a lot that we can learn from younger people. And so I think if everyone does their parts to try to understand each other, we can definitely move forward in solidarity. And one thing that, I think that, I want to end with is bringing in our friend, Dr. Don Bohalana Mabalon, whose life of, whose work on Larry Leong is what has inspired the musical, is that, she once said something to the effect of, I hope that our interest in understanding our histories will be enough for us to continue to tell our stories and to move beyond anything that divides us. I really love that, because there's always going to be something that divides us. And what I hope people remember is that the things that divide us are oftentimes a direct result of all of the oppressive forces around us, whether it be white supremacy or systemic homophobia, transphobia, or colonialism and colonial mentality. And I hope that we can all challenge ourselves to fight against that. And really do our parts to ensure that we are always advocating for justice and making the world a better place for everyone.
Great way to end off this conversation. Again, happy Filipino American History Month, LGBT History Month, all the things. Thank you again. If you aren't already following Kevin, please follow Kevin. There's a ton of resources and a lot of things that they are able to share. And before close out, I want to also give a shout out to our accessibility coordinator, Melissa Kelly Colibri, and of course our interpreter, Stephanie Chow. Our goal as Can't Stop, Won't Stop Consulting is to have all of our programming, including our Instagram lives, be as accessible as possible. And this is one offering that we try to have as well. So thank you again, Kevin, for joining, everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you for the next Conscious Conversation.
Bye, thank you.